guys, welcome to Betwixt the Books. I don't know which intro Gretchen's going to use there. We'll see. Today we're doing a review of Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane, which is a road trip romance sapphic grief book. No, that's what it is. Here we go again. Best friends to enemies to reluctant co-travelers to lovers.
It's a
Yes.
bumpy road.
You're so funny.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're gonna be here to talk about this one, which is out now because all of our content has been pushed slowly and slowly and slowly. But you can read this right now. You can go into stores and get it right now if you so choose. But first, listen to us talk about it because maybe you don't want to get it. Maybe you want to borrow it from the library. Maybe you don't want to read it at all. That's what reviews are for.
So the plot of Here We Go Again, although it has been well described by Michaela here, as this bumpy road, is these two women who were friends in middle school.
Mm.
And her name is Logan, and she is a very, very scatterbrained ADHD, very out lesbian, often refers to herself as a fuckboy, because that's just her life. She is also a very passionate teacher at her high school. And one of the reasons that she has become a very passionate teacher is because of her English teacher in high school, whose name was Joe, who was also a out queer man who accepted Logan when her entire home life fell apart. This is very much the similar story for Rosemary, who is also a writer at heart, but she is an ELA teacher now. After some traumatic events in the big city, she has come back to this small town in Washington where they both grew up, and they're both teachers at the same high school. Now, again, they were friends in middle school, and then something happened, and it totally broke their friendship, and they were closer than close. And then in high school, that turned to like hate, basically, and they couldn't stand each other. And then they moved away and they were like, I'm finally done with you. And again, now they still teach at the same high school where they are now work enemies. And so, needless to say, their relationship is fractious, but both of them are dedicated to taking care of their old English teacher, Joe, who has had some cancer scares in the past. And at the beginning of this book, tells both of them that his cancer has come back and that it is terminal. This, after being Logan literally runs into Rosemary with her car, into Rosemary's car, because that is not a meet cute, it's fine. It's not ugly. A good day. And so Joe is dying, and he says that the line throughout the book is he does not want to die in beige. He does not want to die in the hospital room. He wants to die, on his own terms out in the world. And he asks the two girls, both of them, to drive him to Bar Harbor, Maine, which, if you know anything about geography, which I know little of, is very far away from Washington.
They're kind of on the opposite sides of the country.
Yeah, they kind of are. Literally the opposites. And so after some haranguing, knowing that it probably won't take them to the state line to try to kill each other, they agree to do this for Joe, and then chaos ensues. They end up in a very, very gay van, from someone's business. It says the Queer Cuddler on the side. So they call it, the tagline calls it like the gayest van in the West. And that's how they're traveling on this like very chaotic adventure.
I finished this one up a couple days ago at this point, and I was telling Gretchen we were talking about it ahead of time that I wasn't quite sure where to rate it. And there's a couple of reasons. For one, it did make me tear up, which is hard to do. I'm one of those readers that like doesn't have an emotional response to reading a lot of the time. So when it does make me tear up, it did a good job. So like a book that does that is successful in a lot of ways, but there were a bunch of things which we'll talk about which were a little bit aggravating slash confusing, some things that could have definitely been done better, some stuff that definitely was predictable, or like the very first thing that anyone would think would happen happened. Like it's that thing, like we're not pushing farther for something more interesting. It's just kind of what you expect to happen happens. Um and then there was one thing that made me physically mad every time it happened when I was reading. Which I'll just say, one of the characters, every time she swears, it's Logan, every time she swears, instead of just swearing, she takes some queer pop culture idol and just puts fucking in the middle of it. So think like Ellen fucking DeGeneres. Just every single, like over and over and over again. And every time that happened, I had a physical response. Like emotionally, it made me mad. Will that make you mad? Probably not. I don't think most people will get angered by this, but I was like, I hate this every single time. So where does that leave me? Probably like 3.5. Like it does some things really well, and we'll talk about that. And then there's other things that are kind of a bit questionable, and we'll talk about that. But it was okay. I'm not going to say no to somebody wanting to read it, essentially.
So I have gone through a number now of road trip romances.
Mm.
And I have really enjoyed it as a trope. It's not something that I would have thought of as one. But I have a number of other reviews, most notably Beth O'Leary's The Road Trip. And I love it. This is the same thing for The Road Trip as well, where it's like the second chances type of thing, where they're literally trapped inside a metal cage with all their literal and figurative baggage, and they like have just got to figure it out because they're away from home, they're on their own. In this case, they're also taking care of Joe, who really can't take care of himself. Um, he's in a wheelchair and everything like that. So he has mobility issues and health issues and all this kind of stuff. So I was really excited to see like a sapphic take on this, because all of the other ones that I read have been hetero, and representation is important. But similarly to, as Michaela just said, every single time it did something really well or really good or interesting, it then just chose like the tritest romance trope to follow up the next decision with. And so I was like, okay. And it hits weird because we'll talk about this, is like, is this even a romance novel?
Yeah.
Yes, but we'll talk about this. This is not the kind of romance novel that you can read if you're not ready to cry, which is not normally, or not typically, what people will go to like a romance with this fun, like poppy color cover that this one has. So I did like it. It will end up being about 3.5 for me as well. But I definitely wish that it had done some things better, or at least differently. We do not need this storyline again. Please. Please.
We wanted to start off with some of the things that it did do well. So I wanted to mention that it if you are a queer person reading this book, it will definitely hit you in a lot of your feels for a couple of different reasons. The first one being that it is a very strong found family trope. Obviously, both of these girls attached to Joe as like a father figure for them because of the situations that their home lives created, which is a storyline that a lot of queer people are going to understand when you grow up with a family who isn't accepting, or is outright abusive in some cases. You look to other mentors and you find them, and that's your representation of like who you want to be when you grow up, things like that. So that sort of representation is here. It does also touch on things like the AIDS crisis, obviously, because that's something that Joe lived through. And so be prepared if that's triggering for you, that there's discussions around that are in detail, which I appreciated. It does also talk a bit about how there is sort of like a missing generation of queer elders for a lot of young queer folks because of this event in our history. So it did that well. I do think that if you're a queer person, you're like, well, did it do the queer rep good? Yes. Yeah. I think that sort of thing is definitely one of the strongest points in the book is this found family feel, this like you can make your own family, you can choose the people to be in your life, and it will be fine. Like you will still have them, but you'll also lose them. And that's hard. So yeah, that's definitely something to say was done really well here.
And something just to add on to that too that I'm just thinking of now is like I appreciated that in both Logan and Rosemary's family, it wasn't just a stereotypical like, oh, you're queer, like we don't want you around. Like both of them have individual, distinct, and complicated family things that have happened.
Mm.
So like Logan is still very close with her dad, for example, and he's like totally down with that. So it's like also like different. Sometimes we talk about like accepting or not accepting, and I think they talk about like different levels of acceptance too, about
Yeah.
how like Rosemary's mom is like, right, like like she's not talking to her daughter, but at the same time she just like doesn't get it.
Yeah.
So and then like Logan's whole thing with her mom, and so there's like a whole different layers there too, which I think was done really well. So then we do get to the sad bit, and this is like I think is a core of this book. And again, if you look at that cover,
Sad book.
you are, yeah, this does not look like a sad book. And really, I think the entire backbone of this book is the grief storyline. And one of the things that it does really well, first of all, because it is a dual POV novel, and we'll talk about this, you also just get how Logan and Rosemary's individual approaches to impending grief, right? Because
Yes.
the entire inciting incident is that Joe is dying and he does not want care. He does not want, a procedure. He wants to die on his own terms and he wants to do this road trip, even though the doctors are not into it. um, and so it starts with like this pre-grieving phase of like they know that they're going to lose him and they both have different ways of handling or not in Logan's case dealing with that, right? And how that affects them. um and you also have Joe and how he's trying to like deal with his impending demise. um and that reflection of like they call it the Tuesdays at Maury's moments, but him trying to be like be better than me, while also telling them that he loves them, in not that many words. And then by the time they get towards the end of the book, and I don't think this is a spoiler because you know that he's dying, he goes from being more mobile towards the beginning of the book, and then he moves into the palliative care stage, and that especially really hit close to home as someone who has watched my grandmother go through that, um and how that is like a process of like watching someone dying and knowing that it's happening, and the like, oh, they kind of rebound one day and might have a really bad day and you think, oh, is this it? And then so it's like this like back and forth, it really just hard. And I think Rosemary in particular says this at one point, but just like you get to the stage where you're almost hoping for it, and it makes you feel really disturbing about yourself, but yeah, that whole process, it is detailed, it is realistic, and it's long. My description is not like I'm not blowing up like 2 pages of the book into a whole monologue here, right? So you have got to be ready to go on that journey with Logan and Rosemary in a way in which sometimes it feels like their love story comes second to them losing this incredibly powerful loved figure in their life. Which again is why I'm like, romance? I mean, they kiss.
Yes.
But yeah, it's really, it will make you like tear up for sure, 100%.
Yeah. I finished it before Gretchen did for once. And I texted her and I was like, be prepared. It is sad and it is going to be sad. And she was like, I mean, there's a trigger warning in the beginning, which there is, but like, you're like, it's a romance book.
Yeah.
Be prepared.
I believe I literally texted that to Michaela. I was like,
Yeah.
there's a trigger warning in the front, but like, whatever. Like, it's coming. And
I
I
was
think
like,
it's well, and I think it's almost because you do know it's coming that like
yeah.
you're just like you have to go on that journey of like accepting that this is what's happening.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't just happen. There's like again this like process of like the slow, you know, the slow twists and turns of
Deterioration.
the
Yeah.
process. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Um, because it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot. It's I was crying in public today when I finished it. So
Yes. So, on another note, just a thing to say, there is demisexuality representation in here. Rosemary is demisexual. If you haven't seen other videos on our channel, I'm Michaela, I'm demisexual. I have a video where I talked about some books with ace and demisexual rep, so I can talk about that. This one is also on that list. I mentioned how I feel like the way that Rosemary talked about what she found sexually arousing was a very good representation of demisexuality. There's a scene in a bathtub where she's talking about how when she masturbates, she can't watch porn. It's gross, like it doesn't make sense to her, but she can use her imagination, which is fine. Like this discussion of sexuality of like demisexuals don't ever experience any sort of sexuality stuff or don't masturbate, like that doesn't exist. Like that was really well done. But Gretchen did also bring up, and I agree, there is an element in here of I have only ever had a close enough relationship with you to experience sexual attraction to you. And so I have never in the entire 30 something years of my life had any sexual experience because I'm demisexual. And it's like, that's not accurate. I don't think that's accurate to most people in general, just demisexuals in general. But this isn't, and it's not the first time that Gretchen has seen it in a demisexual representation book. It's happened in other books as well, not just demisexual representation, but I feel, and she does as well, that it's kind of harmful to link that specific romance trope of like it's only ever been you to a demisexual character. Um, Again, speaking from my own experience, I was not able to form that sort of attachment until college when my brain was fully formed. And then I was like, suddenly like, oh, this is what it feels like to be attracted to a human being. I understand now. Whereas both of these characters from these other books did that in childhood. And I'm like, I don't, my experience in childhood was like, I'm confused. Why are people trying to kiss each other? I don't, it's kind of gross. I don't get it.
well, yeah, and it's I mean, there's just that extra added layer of this. And the other one was We Are Never Getting Back Together by Helena Greer, I think was the title. Um, and it was the same thing. It's like they form this attachment in childhood and they don't really understand it. Because then you also have that thing too of like, okay, so are you attaching sexual attraction to something that happened in childhood too? And it's just like this extra weird like layer of thing.
Yes.
And I'm just like, meh, 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 no, no.
It's weird. It's a bit weird. So, positives and negatives there. Likewise, there's ADHD rep, another ADHDer here. And you get to see sort of two different phenotypes of ADHD. I don't think that's the right word. But you have Logan, who's sort of closer to what we would consider an ADHD, or kind of all over the place, very spontaneous, kind of flighty type, like in most things, hard to stay focused, and lack of impulse control, that sort of stuff. And then you have Rosemary, who has ADHD, but through situations in her own life has sort of created a box to control it, where she is very rigid in every single thing that she does, and it creates a lot of anxiety because she feels a lack of control and she needs to have control. So she sort of goes the other direction where everything needs to be very planned, very precise, very same, because if she lets one thing slide, then everything slides. Which both of these experiences are something that ADHD people have. This is what ADHD can look like in two different people. The experience of not getting diagnosed until very late in life is common specifically for most women who have ADHD. Like I also was diagnosed in my last year of college, and not earlier on. Like a lot of young boys usually get diagnosed because they have the hyperactive style of ADHD, whereas there is I was diagnosed with way back in the day ADD, which is not a thing anymore. It's just inattentive type ADHD now. So that's
Yeah.
there if you're looking for it. neurodivergence. It also does sort of talk a bit about how neurodivergent people tend to flock together when they're younger without even really realizing it. A lot of people are like, oh, wait, we were all neurospicy? That's weird, huh? And it's like, no, it's because we all think similarly. Of course, we're going to be friends with each other. Of course.
Yes, in college, I was like, wow, I am the only one of my friends who does not have a thing. And this year, I was diagnosed with inattentive type. So I was like, hey, that makes hyperfixation make so much more sense.
Yeah. When I got diagnosed, the response that my mom had was, Michaela can't have ADHD. She focuses too much. And my therapist was like, yes, no, that is a coping mechanism. ADHD have. So, yes, representation, positive representation. It's there. If you're looking for a neurodivergent book, it is here. That is a thing, and we appreciated it.
So speaking of unfocused ADHD, what is perspective in this book? So I am, as you may know, a heavy romance reader. I read a lot of this, and in particular, if you've seen any of my videos, I talk about this every single time I read a single POV or point of view book, which is that I don't like it. And I love double or dual POV. Sometimes in like polyamorous relationships, you get even more than two. I don't like single, which is why I say I don't like single. I prefer there to be multiple perspectives in a romance novel. I think it gives you a more holistic relation or understanding of the inner workings of the different people in their relationships.
Yeah.
So normally, no matter how many people are in your love situation, every person gets a chapter. And so chapter 2 will come along and it will be this character, and you won't switch points of view until you get to chapter 3. And they are labeled, and they'll say the character's name, usually on top. I've seen like one book that didn't do that, and I was super confused the entire time. But anyway.
Which perspective are we in? What are we doing?
Why are you suddenly talking about yourself in the third person? Oh no, wait, we switched perspectives. I didn't notice a chapter break. But anyway, in this book, the point of view will change within a chapter.
Yeah.
And it's not like in some cases, half of a chapter is from Rosemary and half of a chapter is from Logan. There are full sections where it will go paragraph by paragraph, back and forth. And it is labeled, so you get their name. But at a certain point, it wasn't really until actually Michaela literally just said this that I realized they weren't like changing on the chapter, because I literally just thought their names were chapter and then I went back and I was looking at it and I was like, oh yeah, there were chapters. I just totally like, what was happening? Like what?
Yeah.
Why is it? But it does become really, really noticeable, like I said, when it's like going back and forth like so fast. It's like you blink and it's changing again. It's like, why are you doing this? Why? What? We did not need this brief flash to Rosemary to get her thought about what Logan just said and flash back to Logan. It's okay. You could have just given Rosemary a particular facial expression and we probably would have known, right?
Yeah.
Like we would have been okay. Why do you do this to me?
It bothered me, and I asked, because I don't read as much romance as Gretchen does, and I especially don't read like contemporary romance. I read more fantasy romance, paranormal romance, that sort of stuff. Things with more going on than just the romance. But I was like, that was weird, right? And she was like, yes, no, that was weird. I was like, okay, it's not just me. It's not just because I don't read enough to know that that's a normal thing. But it was like, there were scenes where I'm like, why did we need one paragraph from Rosemary?
We didn't. The answer is we didn't.
We didn't. So I guess be prepared for that. It's a little bit weird. It's not horrible, but it's a little bit weird.
So at the end of the day, like we were saying, we question whether or not it's a romance novel. And what makes it feels like a romance novel, as we said, is its reliance on romance tropes to the point of extreme predictability sometimes. And like, oh, of course we're doing this now. We don't want to talk about them in specific too much because we don't want to spoil anything, in case you do want to read the book yourself. But it did make it feel a little bit like trite and a little melodramatic in places, often on the heels of like a really great moment of representation or discussion of grief. And you're like, Why? So to a certain extent, I'm like, well, maybe this shouldn't have been a romance novel because maybe then it wouldn't have had to lean on these tropes so much. Um, it could have been a lot more about grief. I'm just
Mhm.
not sure. This book is just like sitting very much on the edge for me as something where, like I said, if someone just said, "Oh, I want a romance novel right now to like feel like happy and like a fast read or like a sexy, rash or whatever," like it it's not this. This book is a good book about grief with romance on the side. Um, and so while it does all of these other things really well, again, it may not be what you're looking for if you are looking for a like boppy, quick, fast, sweet, totally daisies and roses romance novel.
Mm.
However, if you are feeling like taking a chance on this book, being ready for that long journey of grief that they all go on together, it is worth reading, as long as you are aware that at some points you'll just be like, okay, we're going to do this now. But if I just power through, there will be good grief stuff. It's a very specific vibe.
Yeah.
So, read, as Michaela said, this was originally supposed to be an ARC review, but it has been pushed a little bit. So, it is now out. You can make your own decision. You can get it from your local library, check it out, like, for yourself and see if you want to read it. But I definitely wish that I had had more of a sense of what we now know before we before we started it, because I thought we were going to get a fun lesbian road trip, and then it was sad.
It's very sad. There was some fun. There's some drag queen fun.
Yeah, the
There's
drag show
definitely
was
moments
great,
of fun. But there's also
inevitably
a,
leading to death.
a lot of sadness.
So, things that are not sad. So for our second piece of content for the month of April, we will be doing a reading roundtable. We This one is not themed. We will just have friends bringing whatever they're reading to the chat. We again have a recurring guest, Erica, who has been not only in reading roundtables but also in videos with me. Like we read the entire Bridgerton series together if you need to go and get refreshed before the third season comes out. And then we also have a brand new guest to reading roundtables, but not necessarily to our channel because it is Josh from Literary Gladiators, and he and I have done content. We've done a buddy read before, and we have also appeared on his channel. So we're really happy to be able to welcome Josh to ours. So we hope you look forward to that, and we will see you there. Thanks, guys. Bye.